Greeting everyone and welcome to the third session of the Symbolon seminar. Today I'm with Hye-Young Kim. Hi.
Hi.
So for those that are attending for the first time this seminar, I will explain very quickly what is the Symbolon seminar about. And maybe you know what is the Symbolon word means. Symbolon is a broken token that only reveals itself its full meaning when reassembled, just as this seminar seeks to bridge fragmented knowledge, bringing together diverse perspectives, with art as a subtle connective medium to deepen our understanding of the AI era and its profound impact on human existence. And today we will discuss a topic that is fundamental for our existence and how this topic can be understood under the AI framework, if I could say. And just before we jump into this presentation today, I will introduce very quickly the team that is behind this seminar. Hye-Young Kim.
Hi.
Hi. Hi again. You are presenting
again, yes.
and part of the team.
Yes. Very pleased to be here. I'm Hye-Young, and I'm an associate researcher at Husserl Archive at École Normale Supérieure in Paris in philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy to have you with us and part
Very
of the
happy to
team.
be here.
Eric is in Portland.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Hi. Hello. Well, I'm also French. Just moved recently to Portland. And yes, I'm from Eric. I'm working at Intel also as a research engineer and specialized in AI.
And I am Del Shaibi, a computer scientist, also at Intel. I'm based in Paris. And Eric and I work together, and we are also friends with Hye-Young Kim too. So this is the team behind, and there is other people, Quentin and Alex, that helps a lot behind the scene.
Yes.
So let me introduce first the meeting of today, the seminar of today. Yes, please. So Subjectivity by Hye-Young Kim. And I want to quote Matisse, and by the way, we will discuss about very quickly about the painting that you can see here. So quoting Matisse that says, "To see is itself a creative operation, one which demands effort. Everything we see in our daily life is more or less distorted by acquired habits. The effort needed to free oneself from this requires a sort of courage. And this courage is indispensable to the artist, who must see all things as though seeing them for the first time." So we can see here from these quotes that subjectivity is something that is in the core of this quote. So we will discuss during this presentation this topic with Hye-Young Kim. So maybe we can go ahead and start.
Thank you. So today we're going to talk about subjectivity, or self as subject. But why subjectivity? Because it has been always important, but especially now because we are in the time of AI. And a lot of people are curious about the consciousness of AI, whether a machine can be conscious or not.
Yes.
So nowadays, there are a lot of debates, a lot of conversations and research going on this topic, consciousness. But to be able to talk about consciousness, we have to know what it means, because what do we even mean when we say consciousness? It's not very clear to begin with. But one thing that is a little bit more clear than other aspects is that when we say consciousness, most likely we mean subjective consciousness. So this idea of subjectivity or subject is very deeply attached to this idea of consciousness. That's why I wanted to look into this concept a little more precisely. We're going to talk about the history of of this idea subject or subjectivity briefly first, and then discuss further. And this lecture is based on one chapter of this book written by me.
Yeah, I have it.
Yes,
somewhere.
thank you. Yeah. So if you are more interested in this topic, there's one chapter dedicated to this topic
Yeah.
in this book. I mean, there are of course many other books available on this topic. So, but today's lecture, particularly
Based on this chapter about
this chapter about subjectivity. So I say this to let you know that this is based on my interpretation again, because there are many different ways to look at this idea, the concept, even how it developed and the history. So this is based on my perspective. Let's see.
So it's your perspective, and you start before very quickly to give a
Right.
history of.
Exactly. I mean, it's not about not particularly my idea of subjectivity, but how to view subjectivity and how to understand subjectivity and how to understand the history of subjectivity, the flow. That's what I mean. But I mean, I will talk about it more in the end, but the end of this lecture. But this is a series. We're planning on giving more lectures on subjectivity, but we start with subjectivity or subject, and the next session, next lecture will be on intersubjectivity, and then finally my concept that I came up with, presubjectivity.
Yeah, maybe I should have said at the beginning that this is part of this series. It doesn't mean that the series, each episode will follow
one after another.
the other, but we will have basically, I think, 3 sessions: subjectivity, intersubjectivity, and presubjectivity.
Right.
And as we said in the previous presentation, each session is followed by a discussion.
Yes.
So we will put on the chat the link of the Google Meet, and everyone again is welcome to join and ask questions.
Yes. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about something so familiar that we often overlook it, the self, I am I, self.
Sometimes it looks like obvious.
Yeah, it's too obvious we think we know what we're talking about, but do we?
I don't think so.
So more precisely, we'll talk about what it means to be a subject. When I say I, what am I referring to? Where is this I located? What does it mean for a being to be self-aware or self-reflective or self-constituting? So can we really answer these questions after that? No.
And what is the difference between self-aware and self-consciousness?
Right. So these questions are not just abstract philosophical puzzles. They shape how we think about freedom, responsibility, memory, emotion, and even language itself. Yeah. They underlie how we understand personhood in law, agency in politics, for example, in Korea right now, there's a presidential election going on. So each person, one vote per person, that kind of idea to this. Because I can vote as one person. And here, one person comes with this idea of subject. We will not talk about that so much today, but, the reason that we can refer to this person as a subject is because this idea of subject is very deeply tied to this idea of, an autonomy, autonomous, independent, self-reflective being, an entity.
That
But
distinguish itself from others.
Right. So anyways, so I wanted to say that this idea of subject and self, or self as subject, is not something that's important only in philosophy, but it's really about our life, daily life, and the world. So let's begin. Oh, and consciousness in science as well, like I said in the beginning. So let's begin with a very short history, a philosophical sketch, if you will, of how the concept of the subject has evolved. So here's this guy, the first guy. You probably know. This guy's name is René Descartes.
René Descartes.
So the thinking self, he's pretty well known because he's important. The modern idea of self basically came from him. What we often call the subject is usually said to begin with René Descartes in the 17th century. You probably know his famous formulation, cogito ergo sum.
Je pense donc je suis.
But I think, therefore, I am.
I am.
With this phrase, Descartes did something revolutionary. He proposed that the foundation of all knowledge rests on the certainty of the thinking self, even if everything else can be doubted. My senses, my body, the world itself, everything. The one thing that cannot be doubted is that I am thinking. That's his idea. So for Descartes, the subject is a self-conscious mind, and his mind is distinct from the body. So
Dualism.
Exactly. He divided the mind and the body. This is the origin of the so-called mind-body dualism. But Descartes' subject is also fundamentally isolated. So this is where all this, huge problem of solipsism begins. It does not arise in relation to others. It is not embedded in history or society or even language. It is a solitary being whose existence is confirmed by its own thought. This Cartesian model is powerful, whether you like it or not. And also, we'll see, problematic.
Yeah.
The next is Kant, the transcendental unity of apperception. So moving forward to the 18th century, we encounter Immanuel Kant, who reformulates the Cartesian cogito in a new key. Kant agrees that the self is necessary for experience, but instead of locating the self in thinking alone, he describes it as the transcendental unity of apperception. So what does that even mean? Right? Essentially, for Kant, in order for us to have coherent experience of the world, of anything, of any object, for things to appear to as ordered, meaningful, and connected, there must be a unifying structure. The I think must be able to accompany all my representations. In other words, there must be a single subject that unifies perception across time and categories. This is I, and this I is not empirical. It's not, excuse me, it's not found by looking inside, like how Descartes did. It is a formal condition of experience. It is a priori, you've heard of this expression, a structural necessity. It is what allows my experience or my experiences to hang together as mine.
So he goes against the mind dualism. Not necessarily.
He is going one step further.
One step further.
Yeah.
Transcending, basically.
Exactly. So it's not
duality.
just... I mean, he criticizes Descartes in his idea that this mind is something that we can know. Kant basically doesn't believe that mind is something that we can know, like something is substance. It's a formal thing. It's a formal condition. So for Kant, I is not an empirical subject, but it's a transcendental subject. So that's the difference. So like I said, so here the subject is not an object in the world. It's not a thing. It's not an entity, but the condition of world appearing at all. And let's move on to the next guy. All this unhappy looking
Well, I like this slide. They're nice.
This guy is Fichte.
Yeah.
After Kant, Johann Gottlieb Fichte. He pushes the logic of the self even further. He proposes that the self posits a self. His famous formula is I equals I. Ich gleich ich. Beautiful. I am I, you know. My three-year-old son, he says that all the time now, like, I am I.
I am I.
Ich bin ich. Du bist du.
He can see it in German too.
Yes. This is not a statement of egoism, though. Rather, it's a statement about self-relation. Fichte argues that the self must be self-positing. It must constitute itself in order to have unity. The self must recognize self as itself. That's why there's two eyes. I mean, there are two eyes. So in his view, subjectivity is not a given. It is something that is actively constituted by the I's relation to itself.
It's a recursive, right? I think.
Yeah, right.
Reflexive.
Exactly. Yeah. However, as we will see later in today's lecture, this kind of self-relation also opens the door to a paradox. Because if the self must reflect upon itself in order to be self, then who is doing the reflecting and who is being reflected on? Like, so it falls into this infinite regress, right? So we'll come back to this issue of self-reflexivity and infinite regress later. But let's move on to the next unhappy-looking guy, Hegel, the social subject. Then comes Hegel, who gives us a major shift. For Hegel, the self is never simply an isolated thinking thing. Instead, it is inherently social and historical. He famously writes, "The I that is we and the we that is I." What he means is that subjectivity arises not in solitude, but in recognition, in the mutual interaction between subjects. We become selves by being recognized by others, and this process unfolds in time. The self is not just a formal structure, but something that is formed and transformed through struggle, language, labor, and history. So here we begin to see the subject not as an unchanging core, but as a becoming, werden, a dynamic process situated within the world and time. And here comes a little bit happier people. It was hard to find the happy-looking Heidegger. We talked about Heidegger in the first session. On the top left, that's Heidegger. Yeah. Slightly smiling. And the bottom, that's Husserl. And next to Husserl, it's Paul Ricoeur. And above, that's our beloved friend, David Carr. Yeah. By the way, he's going to talk next month. Yeah. And that's
we'll talk a bit more about it.
Exactly in the end. At the end. So it's David Carr with me. Yeah. In Paris. In Paris. Actually, shortly after I moved to Paris, he came to Paris. So anyways, as you see, as we like that the philosophers get happier and happier. Not necessarily. And we understand that.
No, I think so. Yes. No.
But anyways, so now here we are, the 20th century. So the keywords for the 20th century shifts are phenomenology, narrative, and embodiment. And we're more used to those ideas, especially phenomenology, because I think a lot of people who work on AI consciousness and consciousness, they try to find something in phenomenology. And that's not a coincidence. It's because it's the most recent development in philosophy, so to say, to think about this issue, phenomenology, and I'm sorry, consciousness and self and
in AI systems too.
Yeah, and so on. So in the 20th century, thinkers like Husserl, Heidegger, Sartre, I don't have a picture of him here, and later Zahavi, Dan Zahavi, or Paul Ricoeur and Carr, they extend these insights further. Of course, there are many more, but I couldn't mention every single one. They challenge the idea of a subject as an abstract, isolated ego. Instead, they explore the structures of experience, the temporality of existence, the embodied and relational nature of selfhood. So, very, very briefly, Husserl's phenomenology introduces the idea of intentionality. Consciousness is always directed toward something. So, Husserl is the father of phenomenology, so to say. And he developed the idea of phenomenology, and really took one step further from Kant's transcendental philosophy. A very important figure in the modern philosophy. For example, Heidegger, obviously, with no doubt, is a very important name, very important theorist in philosophy and modern world philosophy, and Heidegger was influenced by Husserl, enormously. Heidegger highlights finitude and freedom, we saw in the first lecture,
episode.
right? And there are also narrative theories by Paul Ricoeur and Carr, and they bring attention to storytelling, narrative, as how we make sense of life. And, I also interpreted Dasein's understanding as storytelling, as well as we already know pretty well, I hope, very familiar with from our first seminar. Yeah. And so, and more recently, cognitive science and cross-cultural linguistics also have shown that subjectivity is not universal. It is shaped by language, culture, and social practice. So where does that leave us? We started with the idea of the subject as a solitary thinker with Descartes. We've moved through models of transcendental structure, like Kant, right? And self-constitution, like Fichte, and social recognition, like Hegel, and narrative becoming. Today, I want to suggest that the self as subject is not a fixed entity, but a layered, recursive, and relational structure, one that unfolds through time, through relation, and even through language. To understand this complexity, we'll now look at three interrelated branches. The first one is the basic subject-object relation. Second, the modes of self-awareness. And the third, the forms, different forms of the subject, passive, active, and medio-passive. So it's the second section. Before we go deeper, let me give you a brief overview of how today's lecture will unfold. We'll be exploring the self as subject across three interrelated dimensions, like I just introduced. These three are not separate boxes, though, but they are branches of the same conceptual tree, each shedding light on a different facet of what it means to be a self. First, the basic structure, subject and object. So we begin with a foundational question here. What does it mean to be a subject in relation to an object? This is where the phenomenological concept of intentionality enters. The idea that consciousness is always directed toward something. We'll look at how the self stands in relation to what it is not, and how this shapes our understanding of selfhood from the very start. And the second, the modes of self-awareness. We'll distinguish between self-awareness, self-reflection, and self-consciousness. These are often conflated, but they refer to very different levels of experiences. We'll draw on thinkers like Sartre, Zahavi, and Kriegel to see how the self relates to itself. immediately, thematically, and reflexively. And the third is the forms of the subject. This is the core of today's lecture, actually. We'll look at three different modes: the subject, the passive subject, the self as minimal experiential presence, and the active subject, the self as narrative agent, and the medio-passive subject, a concept drawn from ancient Greek grammar that helps us rethink agency as neither fully autonomous nor fully determined. So this is what I mean by my view, my perspective on viewing and sorting the idea of subjectivity and self. Because not everybody has the same perspective. Like not everybody sees
shares the same
idea of three forms of the subject and the three forms of the awareness. And each of these subjects or forms sheds light on the temporal, embodied, and vulnerable dimensions of the self. And by the end of this hour, I hope to show that subjectivity is not simply a function or of introspection or cognition. It's not just that, but a complex, evolving, and deeply relational structure. One subject, one that is lived, spoken, and shared. So now let's begin with the first branch. Oh, yeah. It was
you talked about this earlier, just before.
So now let's move to the third section, subject and object, the structure of consciousness. Let's start with the basic but profound structure, perhaps the most fundamental structure in all of phenomenology, subject and object. A subject is a conscious being, right? It hears, touches, feels, remembers, and so on. But more precisely, a subject is not just conscious. It is always conscious of something, like I kept saying. This is the principle of intentionality, a term reintroduced by Franz Brentano, actually Husserl's teacher, and developed further by Husserl. In this structure, the subject stands opposite to the object. The eye sees the rose. I think about my childhood, for example. I feel sadness, and so on. These acts all share the same grammar. A subject intending an object. So far, this sounds simple, right? But something happens in this structure. Something subtle and complex. So what's that? When we perceive an object, say a rose, we do not simply let it be. We tend to bring it into our sphere of understanding. We name it, we interpret it, we situate it. It becomes familiar. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who's also French, gives us a powerful image of this idea. I quote. This is actually Zahavi in summarizing Levinas. He writes, quote, "Although intentionality does not relate me to that which is foreign, it is a non-reciprocal relationship. It never makes me leave home. The knowing subject acts like the famous stone of the alchemists that transmutes everything it touches. It absorbs the foreign and different, annuls its alterity, and transforms it into the familiar and the same. To know is to bring the other into oneself, to make it part of one's world. But does this mean we can never encounter the truly other? Because it's always just within my view. It's almost violent in that sense, like because the other can't be just the other as it is in this view.
It's a projection,
right? Are we always, and do we always have to like colonize what we perceive? This is a question. But not always, because there are some other languages that function quite differently. For example, Malagasy. Malagasy is a language of the Malagasy people in Madagascar. By the way, I don't speak Malagasy. I wish I could. I'd like to learn, but I just didn't get a chance yet. But I got to learn about this when I gave a lecture in Madagascar one time. That was already like almost 10 years ago. Why?
No,
I know I'm getting old.
No, not at all. I was thinking because I read I read your book, and you talk on your book about you presenting in Madagascar. I thought it was like 2-3 years ago.
I wish, yeah, but no. Anyway, that's what I learned when I was there giving lectures. Actually, I was giving a lecture on Fichte and German idealism, and I had to explain the structure, subject and object, and not only subject and object, but within myself, there's an objectified subject, the second I, and so on. So some of the students in Madagascar, they were like so puzzled, and they were, what do you mean, like objectified subject? And because they said in Malagasy, they don't even have this structure. Subject and object.
Well, this is makes sense about what you've mentioned earlier about the universalism of subjectivity, which is not the case.
Right. Yeah.
And you can see it in language. I was quite surprised, by the way, with the Malagasy way of thinking.
Me too. Well, not to mention that I speak also non-Indo-European language, which is Korean. But even I myself was surprised that Korean also functions not exactly like English or German or French. But a lot of times in Korean, you don't even say I.
Yeah.
It's like you almost never hear it.
In Arabic is the same.
That's why I started this project and wrote that book. Because I realized as a philosopher, especially doing phenomenology says that it has to start from where you stand. But I wasn't really starting from where I stood, where I was standing. It was rather the German linguistic realm that I thought, that's where I did philosophy, which is bizarre because philosophy is for not just German speakers, right? It's for everyone. As long as you exist as a human being, you philosophize. That's what Heidegger himself said as well.
And this is why we do this seminar.
Exactly.
We think that philosophy is for...
But even I myself was basically turning off my other language, my mother tongue Korean, when I did philosophy. Because, of course, I had to write my papers and articles in English and German and publish in English, because if I write it in Korean, only Koreans can read it. So on. It's a practical issue. But apart from that, it wasn't just that. But even I myself didn't probably think that it was possible to do philosophy. But anyways, so in Malagasy, when I heard this from the students, I was very shocked. And that's also, like I said, that's also when I started doubting this very firm idea. Like it's like a castle that looked so sturdy and firm, and that it looked like it was never gonna break down. Something that's permanent. But that was the idea of subjectivity. I was so in it, I didn't see that. But anyways.
I think I didn't know that. I know that in Korean it's the same case, because I read your book. But for instance, in Arabic it's the same thing. Like you don't say I when you usually it's not used. And I know better, or I understand better why through language we can see that subjectivity cannot be understood through.
And hopefully we can talk about this more in my in the third lecture of this mini series of subjectivity. But here I'll continue with the language of Malagasy. So what I learned is that in Malagasy, the grammatical structure does not follow the standard subject-object distinction that we find in European languages. If you want to say, I see a rose, you don't say it as I act upon rose, like I as subject acting upon the
Another
object. Instead, the rose is seen by me, something like that. It can
a passive way of
but it's not exactly
form.
passive either. That's why it's so hard to express this in English. That's why I'd love to learn more. I'd love to learn how to speak this language as well. But more importantly, the very concept of objectification is softened. According to native speakers, once the rose is perceived, it is not held at arm's length. It is related to. It becomes part of the perceiver, but not in a violent way, not in the way that it's absorbed by me. The distinction between self and other does not function as a binary. So in this sense, they also said something very interesting, that they don't have the verb to be. And I was like, how is that even possible? Like, then how, but they still are,
Yeah.
It's not through the idea of being that
how
we
they
exist.
say, I am at home.
And I said, but then how is it possible? And they said, well, we say we live. Like to say I am, like I'm here, I'm there. And they said this connection is something like vital. They understand this between me and others. There's this vital connection that is better expressed in their language. I mean, I don't want to fantasize the other languages and so on, but I wanted to approach this philosophically as a phenomenological research project. That's why I started all this, and I think it was good, like for myself, and hopefully it could also give a little, like a tiny, even if it's a tiny window, a new window to view the world and self in a different light. So this linguistic structure reveals a relational ontology, a view in which being is not defined by opposition, but by connection. Language is not merely a tool in this sense. We use, it's not a tool that we use to express our subjectivity. It is a field in which subjectivity is shaped, reflected, and even created, I argue. So language, far from being a neutral container, it's already a theory of the self. It could be. Let's go on, move on. So the first structure, subject and object, introduces us to some of the key problems of subjectivity. How do we relate to the other without assimilating it? And is it possible to preserve alterity within intentionality? And what does it mean that some languages don't even encode the subject-object binary in the same way? These questions will accompany us as we move forward, so keep them in your mind. But next, we'll look at how the subject relates not just to objects in the world, but to itself. Now that we've established the basic structure of consciousness, subject and object, we turn to a more delicate question. How does the subject relate to itself? How do I become aware that I am the one who is seeing, thinking, or acting, even saying I? This brings us into the realm of self-awareness, self-reflection, and self-consciousness. These terms are often used interchangeably in everyday life, and also even in
philosophy.
Yeah, in academic and science. But today we'll carefully distinguish them because each refers to a different mode of being. Let's start at the ground floor. Pre-reflective self-awareness. When I reach for a glass of water, for me, not a glass, but what is it? Like a bottle of water. I don't need to reflect on the fact that it is me reaching. The experience is mine directly and immediately. It doesn't require an active thought, it simply is. This is what we call pre-reflective self-awareness. Hans Bernhard Schmidt, this guy explains that self-awareness in this sense is more basic than reflection. It is not about taking oneself as an object. It's about being embedded in experience from the first person perspective. He writes that we do not have to think about ourselves to be aware of what we perceive, believe, or feel. The basic self-awareness is non-thematic, meaning we don't attend to it, but it's always there in the background of our consciousness, right? So, it is me who's reaching out to the glass or the bottle.
Can you say it's unconscious?
Yeah, it's in the back.
In the back.
Right, it's always like in the back. And Jean-Paul Sartre, he describes this as a immediate and non-cognitive relation of the self to itself. So it's immediate and non-cognitive. And Dan Zahavi emphasizes that this pre-reflective awareness is non-objectifying. It does not turn the self into a thing among other things. Instead, it's the condition of there being an I at all. This means that I am already present to myself, not as an object, but as the subject of experience. So that's the idea. And now the self-reflection. Suppose I pause and ask myself, why did I say that earlier? Or why do I feel anxious right now? I mean, I don't. It's just an example.
Yeah.
In this moment, I'm not just living my experience, I'm analyzing it, right? And this is self-reflection. Reflection involves a thematic shift. The self becomes its own object of attention. According to Schmidt, this means that the subject of act and the object of the act are both me, but I'm splitting myself.
From the experience?
No, I'm splitting myself into the reflecting and the reflected. The one who thinks and the one who is thought about. Zahavi puts it this way. In reflection, the first person singular effectuates an inner pluralization. There is the I who reflects and the I who is reflected on. But he also warns us not to misunderstand this. It does not mean that there are two selves. Reflection does not split the ego. Instead, it introduces a differentiation within identity. So it's just the same me. The reflecting and the reflected, it's not two different egos. By saying I, Zahavi notes, I affirm both my unity and my internal alterity. This is what Fichte already formulated as Ich gleich ich, I equals I.
Okay.
The self is identical to itself, but only through this self relation. So reflection opens a space. It introduces distance, but not rupture. Now let's go a level deeper. Self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is not just knowing something about oneself. It's being aware that one is aware.
Conscious about conscious.
Exactly. So that's why it is also called meta-awareness. It is being conscious of being conscious, like you said. Think about what happens when you suddenly realize in a social setting that people are watching you. Your experience becomes layered. You are not just talking and moving, but now you're self-conscious. Now you are aware that you're being observed, and even aware that you're being observed.
Like now we are aware that we are.
Exactly. Well, I wasn't so self-conscious about it, but yeah, this is self-conscious in the full reflexive sense. And there's another guy, Uriah Kriegel. Or Uriah Kriegel. He was in Paris as well, and I was in his team before. And a different institute, not Husserl Archive. There's also another institute, Institut Jean-Nicot, École Supérieure. Krieger, also a wonderful guy. And he makes a very helpful distinction here. He separates the qualitative character of experience, that is, what it is like to be conscious of something, from the subjective character. That is, what it is like for me to be conscious. A very clever distinction. And this for me-ness, it's crucial. It indicates that both the experience of the world and the awareness of that experience are bound together as mine. Maybe we can ask Uriah to come and give us a talk too.
Yeah, would be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
sure.
talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But he's not here anymore. He's in the States. But anyway.
he can do it remotely.
Well, anyways, here is a summary of what we just talked about, the 3 modes of self-awareness. You can see the pre-reflective, reflective, and self-consciousness. And the pre-reflective is immediate, non-objectifying awareness. Reflective is thematic, objectifying self-relation. And self-consciousness, meta-awareness, being aware of being aware. And here, let me now bring it in a linguistic nuance that illuminates what's at stake here. When I say I am doing something peculiar. I am both naming and calling myself, right? Zahavi suggests that in the act of saying I affirm both my unity and self-differentiation, we said. And the one who says I and the one to whom I refers are the same, you know. And yet this act introduces an internal gap, a moment of objectification within identity. We can think of this as a form of calling. Every call has both a caller and the called, a called. And yet, in this case, they are both one and the same. This points to something deeper. The way we say I already encodes a philosophy of selfhood. It's not just grammatical convenience, it's a miniature metaphysics, so to say, I say. And importantly, how different languages use and understand I varies. In some cultures, like I already mentioned, like Malagasy or Korean and many others, actually, personal pronouns are often omitted even. And their usage is very fluid and relational. For example, there's this word that literally can be translated as self in Korean. It means 자기. This word is crazy because it literally means 자기, like it's a literal translation, but it means self, you, darling, or a third person.
I read it Yagi at first.
Jagi. Oh yeah.
Okay, Jagi.
Oh, like in a German way. No,
Yeah.
it's Jagi.
Okay.
Yeah, but this word is crazy. Like it means everyone basically. It means I, myself, and you, and even a third person.
Yeah, I was a bit lost. I didn't. Yeah.
So yeah, but let me end this section with a paradox. Like I mentioned earlier, if reflection involves the self-observing itself and self-consciousness involving being aware of that, we're caught in this infinite loop. The infinite regress of self-reflective subject arises when each act of self-recognition presupposes a further self observing the previous one, leading to a never-ending chain of internal observers with no foundational self. In general, infinite regress is problematic when, first, each step depends on the next for justification, like in this case of subjectivity, and the explanation never arrives at a grounding or a self-evident term. This is known as a vicious regress, a regress that prevents understanding rather than aiding it. But not all regresses are vicious. Sometimes they're benign, or even necessary, like in mathematics or systems of iteration. But in the case of subjectivity, the question is whether the self can be self-related without needing an endless chain of observers. There have been attempts to resolve it. For example, Sartre and Dan Zahavi, like we saw, they came up with this idea of pre-reflective self-awareness, a form of self-acquaintance that is not based on observation or reflection. You are aware of yourself in your experience without splitting into two. And also, there is narrative unity, introduced by Ricoeur, Daniel Dennett, and many others, actually. So instead of an instant self-awareness, subjectivity is maintained across time through narrative coherence. It's the main idea of narrative unity. The story creates a unifying an identity, not immediate self-certainty, but continuity. So it's basically to create the coherence throughout time. And there's also linguistic minimalism by Wittgenstein. So this is the idea. The self need not be represented. In fact, trying to describe the self leads to only confusion. I is not a name. It functions differently. The idea is to describe yous, not to posit entities. And there may be other accounts to try to resolve this problem, but nobody seems to be fully happy yet. And we're still working on it in philosophy and in other fields, trying to find a way to understand this better. I'm working on this personally as well. And I work with mathematician Louis Kaufmann, as you know, and we're hoping that we can offer a new viewpoint in epistemology and ontology, using philosophy and mathematics, and to help us to understand selfhood and subjectivity from a different angle. Hopefully maybe we can also talk about this later.
Yeah, I think it would be really
with
good
Lou
to have
as well.
Lou and
We're very close to
publish.
hopefully finishing the first paper. Oops, sorry. So what have we seen so far? Self-awareness is not a single phenomenon, we see. It comes in layers, from the immediate presence of experience to the thematic analysis of reflection to the meta-awareness of self-consciousness. The self unfolds itself in relation to itself. And this unfolding introduces both difference and identity. And this dialectic is the very heart, the very core of subjectivity. But now we ask, is the self always active in this process? Or are there other forms of subjectivity, passive, narrative, or even medio-passive? This takes us to the next major section of the lecture, forms of the subject. We've now traced how the subject relates to objects and to itself across different levels of awareness. But there's a deeper question underlying all of this, which is, what kind of being is the subject? Is the subject something passively experiencing or actively constructing itself? Is it timeless and stable, or is it always changing in time? So there are these questions. In this section, we'll explore three forms of subject, like I said. Passive subject as minimal self, and active subject, which is narrative self, and the medio-passive subject, which is forgotten or not really obvious in modern language. and maybe could help us to reflect on this issue and from a different angle. And each of this view or idea offers a different insight into what it means to say I. So let's begin with the passive subject. There's this philosopher named Galen Strawson, and he offers the concept of minimal subject, also called the thin subject. He argues that subjectivity is nothing more than experientiality. The fact that there is something it is like to be. The fact that there is something it is like to be. If there is an experience, then there must be someone who is experiencing it. This subject is not reflective, not narrative, not even continuous in time. It is momentary, non-conceptual, and pre-linguistic. Think of a newborn baby, an infant, and it has no concept of self, or can't say that it has. No memory, or at least, like, I don't know for sure, but we assume
Yes,
that it looks like no memory, no coherent narrative. But it feels, sees, hears, it perceives, it experiences. This alone is enough for Strawson to affirm a subject. Importantly, this minimal subject does not imply that there is a metaphysical thing behind experience. The subject just is the experience itself. I saw this enthusiastic sentence. I think it was in, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was in Air France magazine. Like, there was an article by Strawson randomly, and it was also it was just by coincidence, but it was like either when I was reading him or like shortly after I finished reading him, and there was this sentence that he said, "I am absolutely happy without any stories." I was like, really? But anyways, like, you can see his position, like, that he's happy, like, as a subject without any
just being
stories. It's a subject I is something that experiences, and that's enough. This view is supported by thinkers who speak of intransitive self-consciousness, like Uri Kriegel. The idea that every experience is implicitly for someone, even if that someone is not conceptually represented. And Dan Zahavi emphasizes that this for me-ness is the essence of subjectivity. It is immediate, non-reflective, and non-objectifying. You don't need to think about yourself to be yourself. So in this mode, the self is unextended in time, free of narrative structure, and defined by immediacy, not construction. But this is not the whole story, right? Human beings don't just experience. We act, we tell stories, we make meaning. This leads us to the active subject. I mean, I have nothing against Strawson, by the way, but I just thought that it was really amusing, his sentence. Like, I'm absolutely happy without any stories. But he was telling stories about himself and like his childhood. And I was like, yeah, you're telling stories. But anyways, now let's think about ourselves.
Maybe he was expressing his. Maybe he wanted to highlight his experience in the present moment without being connected to any story. Or, I don't know, it seems like, because he says, I don't need stories now, maybe. And I don't need, so it means that I don't need to have any memory or think about the past or project myself in the future, but just I'm happy with that.
Right. I mean, it could be. I mean, when I saw that, I was just I was cracking up, like, because it was kind of cute too, you know, like I'm absolutely happy without any stories. And then my husband was there. Yeah, again, my programmer husband,
correct.
who was very different from me. And he was like, oh, I'm like that too. And I was like, really? I mean, it is true that he's really not good at telling stories.
Yeah. So
Like-
if your husband likes it, like, I guess Eric would like it too. So.
Yeah, like when he tells me stories, like sometimes I don't even get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's not very good at telling stories, and he doesn't enjoy either. But I don't know if it's really that problem.
I don't
Like-
know. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, but anyways, we can move on to the narrative self now. So now let's think about ourselves not as momentary points of awareness, but as beings who live in time. We usually do, you know.
Right.
When I say I am the same person I was 5 years ago, I am not pointing to a static core. I am pointing to a narrative, a story. I tell about who I am, what I've been through, what I aim toward. Even when I say I'm not the same person, because there's this continuity of like self as the idea of self, like who I am, whether I am the same or not the same. And this is the domain of the narrative self. It is a process of making coherence of the events of life and experiences of life throughout time. And as David Carr explains, we don't just undergo experiences, we organize them into coherent sequences. The process of configuration gives shape to a life. It is through this structure that we understand ourselves as ourselves. Carr draws on Wilhelm Dilthey, also a very important figure in philosophy. And Heidegger also was very much influenced by Dilthey. And Dilthey describes life as a kind of melody. The events of life are like musical notes that gain significance only in their temporal relation to each other. These events are not simply encountered, they are lived through, interpreted, and remembered. So,
Pretty beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so what makes a life coherent? What gives it unity? Narrative coherence doesn't mean sameness. As Paul Ricoeur writes, identity is not static. It is modified and transformed over time. Yet through narrative, we can still say it is my story, even as it changes. But narrative isn't just about memory. It's also about action. According to Carr, the subject is not only a subject of experiences, but also a subject of actions. Experience tends to look backwards, like what happened to me, but action looks forward. What am I doing? What is my goal? You see this resemblance of Heidegger and
Yes.
Vorlauf and Symptode, and like running towards or walking towards the
I remember.
future and so on.
We discussed this on the
that's right.
first seminar.
Exactly.
First session.
That's why I wanted to interpret this existence by Heidegger in this storytelling structure. But anyways, this forward directedness gives rise to what Carr calls narrative grasp. The ability to make sense of one's actions and experiences over time. He writes, this is a quote, "The narrative grasp of the storyteller is not a leap beyond time, but a way of being in time." End quote. The subject in this view is a project, a being that shapes its existence through choices, through ends, through meaning. But can such a fluid, ever-changing being, self, can still be a self? For example, Alastair McIntyre I don't know if I'm pronouncing his first name right, but McIntyre says yes, but only if we see the self as a narrative unity. We are who we are because we tell our lives as coherent stories, from birth to life to death. And also another person, Maria Schechtman, she builds on this, arguing that to be a self is to understand oneself narratively. Even our sense of moral responsibility presupposes a continuous story. And there's another person, pretty well known actually, as well, Daniel Dennett. He goes even further. He calls the self a center of narrative gravity. We don't just have stories, but we are stories. And yet, these stories are not fully our own. Dennett writes, quote, "Our tales are spun, but for the most part, we don't spin them, they spin us." This brings us to a deeper insight. The self is not just active. This is also shaped by forces it does not control. I mean, this is not Daniel Dennett's idea. Now I am moving from this idea to go to the idea of the concept of medio-passive subject. Middle voice.
I see.
This is something very exciting that I found out. So, for example, when I wrote my first book on Heidegger and Sorge and Geschichte, I didn't quite think about this, although it's really there in the system of Dasein's analysis. So I mentioned that in my book in We as Self, that I didn't quite see this, but when I refound this idea, I was very excited because it could give us this insight that could make this whole story about self so much richer than just viewing it as active or passive, because it's something in the middle. So now let me introduce this grammatical form that has largely disappeared from modern languages, the middle voice. The ancient Greek verbs came in three voices: active, passive, and middle. And the active voice is the subject. Is a subject that acts. So, for example, I throw the ball. And the passive voice, I mean, we all know it's like it's a subject that is acted upon. I am thrown. But the middle voice, the subject in the middle voice is syntactically active, but semantically passive, meaning that it is the subject of the verb performs an action, but it cannot actually perform the action upon itself. Yeah. We're going to talk about it more.
Okay.
Sorry, let's so the one example is like the fabric washes well in modern English. The fabric is syntactically the subject. The fabric washes well. Or this pen writes well. The pen or fabric, in the sense, they are the subject, but it is being washed or written, like used, So it is a close example to this idea of middle voice. So
it's not the pen that is writing.
Exactly.
He's used to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in this sentence, pen or the fabric is the subject.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, that it's syntactically active, but semantically passive. In the middle voice, agency is very ambiguous. The subject is not fully autonomous nor fully passive. It acts in the context of being acted upon. And why does this matter? Because the modern subject, the one inherited from Descartes, is always active. It acts. It thinks. It constructs. is the master, but this misses something essential: the limitations of human agency, the finitude of existence, the vulnerability of being. But if you think about stories from like ancient traditions, like mythology, for example, a lot of those stories begin with a prophecy, for example, Oedipus, he acts with full autonomy, he make choices, he acts, he lives his life on his own, as an autonomous being. But he, in the end, fulfills the fate, a fate he cannot escape. His actions are his own, but they're also bound to a larger structure. So you can think of that.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is the logic of the middle voice. And it is fair to see Dasein as being in the world or being towards death, in Davidsein or Sein zum Tode in this light. Because Dasein is a free being, yet bound to its finitude in the world and also to its finitude that it dies. When we think of ourselves as medio-passive subjects, we acknowledge that our lives are shaped by both freedom and constraints. We make choices, but those choices are always within limits. Biological, social, historical, and existential. Excuse me. We tell stories, but those stories are entangled with others as well. Our agency is real, I live my life. That is also true. I walk towards the death. I run towards the possibility of being on my own. But it is never total because I'm bound to this world. I am in this world and I come with this finiteness that I am going to stop existing at one point. And I'm with others who I cannot control, This is where the middle voice offers a deeper model of selfhood. Rather than dividing the self into either experiencer or agent, the medio-passive subject holds both. It is a self that is situated, responsive, and attuned. Not outside the world, but within it. It is also a self that is open to alterity, to the otherness that we can neither master nor erase. So far, so good?
Yeah. I think there will be a lot of questions. But
yeah. Let's briefly summarize what we've seen. Okay. So there was passive, which is minimal, and subject, and that is thin, experiential center, atemporal, and momentary, and there is active narrative, self or subject, which is acting and interpreting over time, and it is historical and developmental. And there's this medio-passive voice or subject that is situated, entangled, and acting within limits. It's rather cyclical and relational. Each model reveals something different about the self. None is complete on its own. Together, they suggest a complex, layered, and evolving picture of subjectivity. One that is lived, not merely constructed. Sorry, I am allergic to yeah, Paris and May. It's a problem.
Yeah.
So we began with Descartes' claim, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But perhaps we now begin to see that the I who thinks is not so simple. It is a minimal center of experience. It is a narrative being shaped by time. It is a medio-passive presence that is entangled with the world and the others. And to conclude, let's now bring these insights together and ask, why does it matter? So
Why subjectivity matters?
Yeah. Why do we still have to talk about this? We traveled a long conceptual path. We began with Descartes, who grounded the self in the act of thinking. We traced the evolution of subjectivity through Kant, Fichte, and Hegel, and then into 20th century phenomenology. We examined how the self is structured in relation to objects, how it reflects upon itself, how it narrates its life, how it is shaped by time, action, language, and culture. And now we arrive at the heart of the matter. Why does all this matter? First, because it helps us to understand a major shift in philosophical thinking. So in philosophy, it still matters. The self is no longer seen, or not only seen, as a substance or an inner core hidden inside the mind. It is not something that is invisible, something like an invisible thing that owns thoughts and experiences. Instead, the self emerges as a relation. We could see also a dynamic field of experience, action, and interpretation. The subject is not isolated, but constituted in and through relation to objects, to time, to language, and crucially to others. Because when I began, I told you that one of the biggest problems of Cogito ergo sum by Descartes was this solitude, this isolation. Because apart from I think, you can't be sure of anything, including others, including my own body,
including
even,
everything, almost.
Second, this shift allows us to move beyond the Cartesian model, like I said, which still dominates many forms of thought today. We would think, oh, we're over it, it's problematic. No, we're still living in that framework, in that paradigm. Believe it or not.
I believe it.
From philosophy to artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, really in every field possible. The Cartesian subject is autonomous, transparent to itself, and sealed off from the world. And, that's really how we think of a self very often. But the phenomenological and narrative perspectives reveal a different picture. A subject that is always already situated, a subject that cannot be without the other, a subject that lives in finitude, vulnerability, and historicity. That is a far more realistic account of what it means to be human. Right. Because it's about human being, human self, not.
Well, yeah, this is really key here, and I think we touched base on this on the second session when you talked about entelechy of technology, and where usually we easily give AI systems. I would not say the same level as a human being, but we start talking about those models being conscious and so on. And it feels like there is a lack of misunderstanding the self and what is being a human being.
Right. So that's the point. So it is to reclaim complexity. So it's not just a picture of our brain that could tell everything about our being or our consciousness. I mean, that is also very important and meaningful. And it had, like, this kind of research also have helped us in many different ways. And psychology, cognitive science, and philosophy, and in medicine, and in all different kinds of fields as well. But that's not everything. But somehow we've come to this idea that they could tell us everything about consciousness and our being and self and so on. So this is the third point. This complexity protects us from simplification that are increasingly prevalent today. In an age of, metrics, datafication, and algorithmic prediction, statistics, and
everything is numbers.
Yeah, we are often tempted to reduce the. I'm sorry.
You want something?
No, it's okay. It's also because it's the air is a little stuffy now, a little bit more. Thank you so much.
No, it's
profile. Well,
humans are just numbers, maybe today.
Yeah. But apparently I'm not. I'm like stiffing it up. Like I'm having trouble breathing right now. So we're often tempted to reduce the self to a profile, a neural state, or a consumer identity.
Oh, avatars online.
Right. I mean, we think of ourselves like that. But the philosophical study of subjectivity reminds us that the self is not entirely knowable. And it's not reducible to function. It's not just the functions. We're not just a collection of functions. And it's not detachable from the world, because we're still in the world. And I briefly mentioned this in the first lecture. That's why I began with Heidegger and being in the world, Dasein. Although Heidegger does not speak of subjectivity and subject in his system. Anyways, to speak of subjectivity is to speak of a depth that resists capture. Finally, the insights we've explored today point us toward a relational model of selfhood, a model where identity is not singular but plural. Freedom is not autonomous alone, but resonance with others. Meaning is not imposed from outside, but emerges through narrative and attunement. And consciousness is not a possession, but a process, becoming. This relational self is not a self that disappears. On the contrary, it is a self more deeply embedded in life, more open to others, more responsive to time, more attuned to its own limits. And this is the final thought. Let me close with a simple yet radical idea. To say I is not just to name a subject. It is a step into a history of philosophy, language, and relation. It is to say I am here, not alone, not abstract, but in the middle of time, shaped by stories spoken through others and still unfolding. And perhaps, as Paul Ricoeur wrote, the most faithful way to understand ourselves is not to define the self once and for all, but to continue telling and retelling and revising the story of who we are.
I think we have a couple more songs, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
We're done, basically.
Yeah.
So, like we mentioned, it's not next month, because next month we're going to have David Carr here, and he will talk about Husserl and philosophy and science.
Okay.
But after David Carr, we'll continue with this series. So I'll talk about intersubjectivity and presubjectivity, which will elaborate further this final thought about selfhood in relation. A selfhood is something that's emerging in the world.
Yeah, I think so. This will be probably after David Carr, but we will briefly give what's coming next. So
sorry about this noise,
no, it's
right?
I don't know what's happening. Just few noise. Maybe Eric, you are not on mute. Maybe it's us.
So I think, I mean, practical problem. We should post the link to the Google Meet to invite others to join. Ruud, who was already there last time and asking questions, looking for the link. So this time he will be able to speak for himself.
Yes. So give us a few minutes. Go ahead, Eric.
So sorry I didn't jump in the conversation in the middle. It's kind of difficult when you are far apart. But I mean, I had many questions. I capture only 3 of them.
Maybe first we can.
I mean, like usual, I mean, I would try to bring things back to AI. I mean, the impression I have, not an impression. I mean, what I wonder is like, if we can move a little bit outside the human box. Everything we're talking about, every interpretation, and that's normal because I mean that's what philosophy is about, is wondering things from a human eyes about human life, about human consciousness and human self-awareness. And I wonder, like, how much does AI agents need to recognize as itself? How much subjectivity is really needed? Is it the same 3 level you describe? Or is it some orthogonal level? Because I mean, in each of the 3 levels, I mean, there might be, other gradation in how much you are in each of them. And maybe that relates to the next part also of intersubjectivity. Because what I'm wondering is like you do in insects or other stuff like that, can we consider a collective individual without self-awareness or all level of self-awareness? And how much is needed to be autonomous? And can you only live through the goals of the community? And is subjectivity a condition for any form of consciousness?
I think we can briefly, very quickly. I think it would be good to share the link on the chat so that everyone can join, and then we can start the discussion.
I see it on YouTube,
so I just put it on voila. So
multiple people want to join this call. Yes.
Alors,
and also I wanted to last small part of my questions. I think, but at some point you mention it, like the relation to Heidegger finitude. And, if the AI agent is part of a bigger individual, a bigger consciousness, it's like a cell die in a body. Like the cell dies, the body lives. And that's also questions, individual finitude.
Before, I think we're good to know the questions and welcome everyone first. Before jumping into the discussion, maybe we can pause a few minutes. Voila, people are joining up.
Oh, it's great that it works this time.
Yeah, this time it works.
Apologies again, to the people who couldn't join last time.
Yeah.
There was a technical problem.
There was a technical problem. We were starting, so
it was the second time.
Second time. This is our third one. We are still learning.
So we're doing a little better.
We improved.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, can you share the video on the Google Meet? Because there's a lag between YouTube and the Google Meet. I'm aware of it, but other people might find it weird.
You mean the screen?
I don't know. I mean, maybe Hye-Young can switch on a cam on a laptop, because suppose this is our laptop which is connected.
Okay, then I can stop sharing. So so that you can share the screen.
No, I can share the screen again. I mean, we are going to share the screen. It's just a brief pause so that we wait everyone to connect first. Yeah.
While waiting, should I start talking? Okay. It's an interesting question and very complicated one too. How much self-awareness does a machine need to be a subject. But first of all, I want to ask this question again. Does a machine need to be a subject? Do we want a machine to be a subject? Is that our goal? And if so, why do we want that? And I have those questions first to myself and to all of you. If a machine has to be somehow a subject, under that condition, self-awareness is a necessary condition, obviously, because a machine has to be aware of itself as a subject. Machine has to know itself as a subject to be a subject at all. But that's why it's problematic, because when we want to think of a machine as a subject, we just automatically, immediately, we think of this machine as a single separate subject, which is separated from our being as well. Just as how we think of ourselves as a single autonomous independent subject, which is not, I don't deny that idea. And to some extent, we even need it to lead a healthy life, like socially and psychologically, politically, and so on. And our world is now based on this idea, like I just explained. So we cannot deny that, but that's not the only way of understanding an entity as a subject. Or a self. So when we come out of this box and try to understand the being of machine or an AI as another being or another entity, it comes with a different aspect, different questions, I think, because we don't have to see that as something that is independent from us, something that exists as it is. Maybe that aspect is not fully necessary for a machine or an AI to exist as an entity. Maybe we can view this in a more relational and intersubjective field, meaning that the AI or machine can be there as another entity in relation to us. So there's this relational ontology between us. In that case, the questions shift. So it's not necessarily all this self-reflection, self-awareness questions, but it's more on the relation between us or me as a human being and the machine as a machine. Unless we want the machine to be just like another human being.
I mean, that supposes a form of control. Like if this is what would say the fate of the machine would be our own thinking or will. But I mean, many people are looking for having machine being more autonomous, maybe emerging themselves some consciousness, and it's not that as simple as pulling the plug.
So maybe just before we continue the discussion, just welcoming everyone, then we can jump and ask questions. And so thank you for joining, everyone. Of course, you can ask questions on the chat, or you can just raise your hand and you can open your mic so everyone can participate.
I think Hood raised his hand.
Yeah, and please just mute yourself when you are not talking, because we can hear some background. And then, so you see here on the slide, so this is the quote of Matisse that we used. I invite everyone to reflect on this, and then the discussion is open, of course, and then we can continue on Eric's question.
Yeah. Well, just to add to the response to Eric's question, I think we come back to this question of entelechy, as we discussed last week. Oh,
or last month.
Oh,
It was a
yeah.
month ago.
right. Last month, whether a machine has, whether we want to see a machine having its own entelechy within itself, and if so, why we want that, why we would want.
I think there will be always people that want, and there is different kind of wants, and people are wants. Maybe.
And right,
But yeah,
and the second question would be always if that's possible, even if we want that.
yeah. And what would be the consequences of having such machine? Does it? Maybe it's another side question about intentionality, because you've talked about intentionality and how it's shaped the relationship with the other object. And so, if we consider this AI system as an object, and also objects that are not as the one, I mean, they can reproduce human level features. Would that have an impact on the self itself?
Absolutely.
Going
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always the problem, and you're right. It's fair to raise this point. That's why I wanted to say we can view this in more of a relational field instead of me as a subject and you as another subject, but still an object of to me, because I'm the subject to me, and you're still the object of my perception and my thoughts and so on. And that's what I exactly explained in terms of subject-object intentionality and the absorption of the subject of the things that it perceives. And and that's very problematic when it not only comes to the machines, but with other people and the nature and the animals and so on. And that has been causing a lot of problems for sure. And if we continue to view ourselves and other entities, including the machines, in this framework, it could cause even more problems, possibly, very, very possibly. But if we free ourselves from this framework, then there could be another way. And oh yes, I wanted to say this: would that affect us?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Because even when I view the others as other, an object of my perception and my understanding, it's mutual. I mean, I am transformed as well through this relation, through this connection. Although it's not really the connection that this Malagasy language represented. So this is always mutual. So if whether machine is recognized as another subject or an object, it's going to change our view and it's going to change ourselves. But like I said, maybe we don't have to see it that way necessarily.
Yeah, the way we project, when we project intentionality on others, we infer that they are humans or animals, and we kind of have a construction of what they are. And we can make the difference between humans and animals and what they can do and what they cannot do. And what could be problematic with AI is that they can reproduce human capacities, and we can project on them what we think about human. And
exactly,
but they are not. And this is why we see all these discussions about are they sentient and so on. And this affects us in a way.
Of course, yeah. Eric, do you have something to say?
I think he says that there is someone want to ask question. Eric, maybe you can.
Yeah, I think it's nice to also give the mic to someone else.
Yes, yeah.
I think Ruud, if you want to join and ask your question.
Thank you, Eric. I had a very similar question to you, to your question. Angel, if I may call you
right.
that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my name too.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, I didn't give this name to myself. I didn't choose it myself. I don't call myself
Okay.
Angel,
Yeah.
by the way. I mean, some people are like, oh, I can't do this. Like, you call yourself Angel? Like, no, yeah.
You have been given.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope you
by
are
the
an
way.
angel. Anyway, one thing I was a bit confused with just now is your use of the term self and subject, which you seem to identify or equate. Well, I believe that what we mean by self is necessarily a subject, but not the other way around. Something can be subject without being self. So, for example, a computer would definitely be a subject because you throw something at it, let's say, and to take the etymological meaning of subject is you throw something at it, you eject it at the computer, and you get some feedback. So that seems to make it qualify as subject. But to say that it would have a self, whatever that may be, that seems to go wrong.
Yeah, you're right. It's a very good point. And I agree with you. And also, in Buddhist philosophy, although I don't have expertise in Buddhist philosophy, at least I learned that they say that there can be subjectivity, but not selfhood. So it's a subject without self. So yes, and that was
I don't think they say that, but yes.
No, they don't.
No, the Buddha, it's often misquoted, but what he actually says is, you are not this, you are not that, you are not this, you are not that, you are not anything that appears to you. And we invalidly, illicitly conclude from that he says there is no self. But if you are not the table in front of you, nor your computer, nor the person next to you, it doesn't mean that you do not exist or that there is no self.
I mean, it's also
That's
very
a wrong-
possible that they understand in Buddhist philosophy or Indian philosophy, they understand this concept of subject or subjectivity very differently from this Western philosophical idea. But anyways, I read it somewhere.
possible.
Like I said, I have no expertise. But anyways, I just was understanding what you were saying compared to that subject and self are not necessarily the same thing, like combined together, like necessarily. And that was my idea too, that, but from my point of view, self is not necessarily it's not only the subject. That was the idea. But that's an interesting point. A machine can be a subject without being self that resembles a human subject. So that's another idea to think about consciousness of a machine or an AI.
But
the
depends
reason,
then what you mean by consciousness.
Exactly,
If
that
you mean
was-
subjectivity.
well, that's not just me. I'm not even just here to sell that idea, you know. I'm just, I wanted to tell you that that's, whether you realize it or not, whether you like it or not, that's like most likely that's how we understand consciousness when we talk about consciousness. We talk about it in that way, like as if it were always just a subjective consciousness. That's what I wanted to show today. But there is another question.
No, I think Remy has raised his hand.
Yeah.
If you've finished, Remy, you can go
I'm
next.
done. We can listen to Remy.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Angel.
Thank you.
It was really, I love what you said about reintroducing complexity. Really agree with that. And I have, it's actually a non-AI related question, so I hope it's okay. But
yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah,
of course.
Thank you. So I'm writing my thesis currently, master's thesis, on subject-object thinking in relation to the ecological crisis.
Oh yeah, that's an important question.
Yeah. So basically, I find this dualism very problematic because it leads to an exploitative relationship with nature. I use some literature from Bruno Latour. And it leads to this opposition where we think, okay, subjects, we are subjects and we are active. I mean, we act on all this inert, passive matter that we can just use how we want and without limits because, well, it's not a subject.
Yeah, the mastery of subject. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then I'm using sort of Merleau-Ponty's work to sort of see how he responds to this issue. And I was curious, to what extent do you think we should maintain this framework of organizing our experience or organizing reality, perhaps, or as an ontological framework, if it's still tenable right now? Yeah, could you elaborate a bit on that?
In whatever way, we will always need some way to understand ourselves because that's what we do. Like, that's what we want to do. And that's how we can give ourselves meaning, like how we understand ourselves and how we understand the world and how we live and so on. Even if we heavily philosophize every single question of life, we all basically have to know, why I'm here and what do I do and how we live and how we should live and so on. So how to have that framework is the question, not just related to AI or environmental issues and so on, but really to our existence itself. And that's why I began this whole seminar series with Heidegger. I mean, I'm not saying that Heidegger is giving us an ultimate answer, but it gives a good starting point to rethink these problems of subjectivity and this mastery of subject. But then how do we escape from this framework? That's really hard because it's the paradigm and we're in this paradigm. And because we're in this paradigm, it's very hard to get out of this paradigm because we're already in it. So it's very hard to find a way to think otherwise. But I think this way of understanding more in a relational way, so relational ontology, and also because modernism is basically, Europeanism, like meaning that anything that is modernized, you can say that it is westernized. So in that sense, to some extent, we need to free ourselves from this almost colonial view of self and subject or subjectivity. Like philosophically, we're within this paradigm given by the Western
cultural
exactly philosophy. I mean, like I said, I don't have expertise in non-European philosophy, I should say, but because we see these limits and we want to find another way. I mean, here I say already another, but it's not something that is outside of our understanding. It's already there. It's just that we need something that could help us, like to refine it. And that's what I mean by to go outside of this little
the box, you mean?
Box or shell.
Or the biased.
Yeah, but even in the West, like for example, I'm Korean, but even the modern Korean society, it's based on this idea of subjectivity, basically, like the one that I just explained, the lectured on. So we all are living in this world now, and so yeah, we can try to find a way to tackle this. And I mean, we'll talk about this more in the next session, hopefully, when I try to explain what I mean by presubjectivity. But that's very much about this relational understanding of self. And sorry,
Thank you so much. Just can I ask one short follow-up?
Yeah.
To what extent would you say that is a sort of reformulation of the concept of intentionality? Is intentionality more about the sort of opposition, whereas what you're proposing is more about kind of stressing the relationality? I mean, I understand these to be distinct ideas of thinking about subject and object.
Yeah, like this relationality or
Yeah.
this connection.
Yeah.
This connection that is pre-epistemologic given, meaning that there's this connection, like ontological, like existential connection between I and not I's, including other human beings and everything else. And this connection is something that is already there. So this is like a relational field. And to rediscover, I mean, it is already discovered because it's there, but it's to bring that up, bring that out, and talk about and understand ourselves, not from this point of view, me as a single, independent, solitary thinking subject.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So just before Eric, another Eric has raised his hand, but there is some questions on the chat that we can go through.
No, it's me, but I'm following the same rules.
Okay. Okay. So let's maybe answer the question on the chat. I think Camila Pastor, but she left. She asked some questions.
She's an anthropologist.
Oh, okay. And she says how this intersects with Donna Haraway formulation of situated knowledge and the question of feminist objectivity.
I think it's very much relatable. I mean, I would love it if Camila could stay longer.
She left.
I know,
yeah, but
and
she
could
hear.
explain more. But I mean, but I can't say much about Donna Haraway. But situated knowledge and feminist objectivity, it's very much related to this issue. And I actually wrote a paper on the feminist objectivity in relation to philosophy of religion, especially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Ouri, sorry if I mispronounce your name, Ouri Wolfson. How is this related to Buddhism consciousness in meditation? I was thinking of your three modes of understanding: self in relation to people who are going through mental health issues, which is very close to my take in my research work. So thank you so much for this clear division.
Okay, I'm thinking of three modes of understanding self to people who are going through mental health issues. Mental health issues with the three modes of understanding self. Like, do you mean by three modes of understanding self the three forms of subjectivity, or did you mean...
No, you are talking on the passive, active, and that's what the other one. Something you are talking on the passive, active.
Right. Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Passive, active, passive. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Right.
Yes. So, because my research work is related to, I was working on dissociative identity disorder. So it made sense to try to. I was trying to talk. I'm trying to understand how we can integrate or understand multiple personality disorder or DID in terms of subjectivity. So yeah, it kind of made things more clear for me. So thank you.
I mean, but at the same time, like when you say mental health issues, there are many different types of mental health issues as well. So it's very hard to just to say mental health issues. But I could say that maybe we can have another view when we think of ourself not only as active and passive, but in middle voice, like I said, and also in the mode, also in the relational field. So when this person, let's say there's one person who is going through a mental health issue, and normally, well, this is my imagination. So let's say this person with this mental health issue, normally it's about a person who is confused with himself or herself, their own identity, or their identity within the world and their perception of the world. Like, do you mean by mental health, whether that issue or something more like depression or something more psychological? Because I think those two have different.
Okay, so mine is more related to dissociative identity disorder. And I was
Dissociative
kind of like
disorder.
connecting it
Okay.
Yeah. So I was like, because I wanted to like, basically what I'm doing in my research is that I'm trying to show, well, it's a very complicated research work. Okay, right? I'm still exploring, but I'm looking into Sartre's idea of like, I'm trying to bring in the notion of existential therapy. So I'm trying to bring in a lot of other ideas, but then how to understand the notion of identity or consciousness in terms of narrative identity, right? You mentioned narrative identity, and then just now you mentioned one. I forgot that mediocre or the middle ground. Something I forgot the term. Sorry, so sorry.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I see at least your point a little bit
It's a
better.
more accurate way to take it. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I
Sorry?
can't say how it could be helpful, like in a specific way, but I see a possibility, and because, like she just said, I think, when you say mental health issue, mental health problem, like it's a problem because it's considered as a problem, and most likely it is a problem with her or his identity and being a subject is not being a healthy, standard, normal subject, and having other ideas about himself or herself and about others. So in that sense, when this person is not considered only as a subject in this term or an object of our observation, there can be another way to understand this phenomenon. And actually, we were confused, but the other question?
Yeah, there is another question.
Yeah,
and then Ruud, just you can go after.
Right, we didn't answer that question. How is this related to Buddhism, consciousness in meditation? How is this related to Buddhism? Like I said, but what is this? Like when you say how is this, what is this?
I thought you answered a little bit earlier when you mentioned Buddhism.
Oh, he's going to talk.
Hello.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, all right. Yeah, what I meant is your talk. How is your talk related to consciousness, Buddhism, and their view on everything that you discussed?
Oh, everything.
Basically, the topic of subjectivity, how is it related?
How is it related? Like very much related. I mean, because in Buddhism also they talk a lot about self, and even if it's no self, and subjectivity, and and consciousness and meditation. I mean, like I said about the other problem too, because I don't have much expertise in the other thing that you're trying to compare. I can't say much. I can't give you an answer, but I can say that this my way of viewing this issue, like concept, subjectivity, could help to shed a new light in understanding consciousness and meditation as well. Because in meditation, what is it like? You lose yourself, like, or you have to be free from yourself, like
from your senses.
Right, your senses and your experiences, and in that sense, of course, consciousness has a very different like realm, like structure, than how we understand consciousness is subjective consciousness. So when we admit that to a large extent our debates and our discussions on consciousness is evolving around subjective consciousness, and when we understand what we mean by this subjective better, then obviously we can say more about
it's really hard
other
to answer.
forms of consciousness or consciousness in other conditions and traditions.
I think Ouri has another question. Are there practical implications of your talk for developers of AI?
I think there could be. I mean,
I was about to ask one, which is also related to AI. So maybe I should go with my question, and
and then we can
practical aspect.
And then after that, Ruud can go after you. Sorry, Ruud. Go ahead, Eric, and then Ruud after.
So when I raised my hand, it was when you start talking about the Western bias, and that was kind of related to a question I had during the presentation. So in your book, I mean, most of the analysis goes through language analysis, like you're looking at the different self in different languages and the way people are expressing it and the relation between them. And I mean, my question is kind of reversing thing, because language models learn from language. And so my question is, I mean, does or how much language will influence the subjectivity of an AI? And there's some interesting, to illustrate sociological studies by someone, Christophe, that I would like you to meet at some point. For instance, where he assign, in a language, a personality or a distinction based on, where the people is located on Earth. The LLM, reproduce the sociological behavior of its assignment. So I know it's a proxy, is not a self, but I mean, still, I mean, there seems to be a huge bias from the language. And in your opinion, I mean, what would be a good or best language to eliminate or help to kind of remove the bias? Or should it be maybe a meta language? I mean, something we come up with and translate every document before filling it.
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't know so much how much is developed and how many languages are involved in this, but it's much better now. But for example, with Korean, like, I mean, this is really not a current issue anymore, but a few years ago when the Google Translate started working really well, for example, for English and German, or English and French, or even Japanese. But it worked never well for Korean, for example. Like, it was null. It was horrible. You could not use that for Korean, for example. And that was the inequality when it comes to tech, and especially this AI language models and so on. That was always a problem that I had in my mind, because I knew this issue. And now with newer, more developed AI bots and machines. Of course, like languages like Korean also work better, but not as well as English, for example. Like the core language is English, right? And
because there is a misrepresentation, and also because the core of the data that have been used earlier was.
So I don't know if there could be like another level of language, like a meta language, to overcome this issue that you mentioned. But before,
because, I mean, you're talking about the let's say syntactic translation, even. But I mean, what I'm really thinking about is the underlying concept behind the language. I mean, what you highlight in your book, that the language comes, to show some kind of form of deeper understanding of self or
yeah,
cultural.
I think absolutely languages do that, and that's why I wanted to introduce Malagasy and Korean, and that was the whole book, like you said. It's not just a syntax problem, but it's like I said, it's like a miniature metaphysics. It not only shows but shapes the way we understand self and so on. But for that, what I'm wanting to say is that we need more languages, I think, like diversity, like first, no? Like to have more examples possible, because it is expressed through specific examples of the spoken language, the spoken, like our expressions. And for that, we need to collect more examples, more data. But for that, I think we need non-significant languages as well in the model. But it's not only this, like AI and so on, but in general, we're losing very rapidly many small languages. But when it comes to the machine and AI and so on, like this inequality and the concentration is even greater. So I think your question is still related to the diversity of the language, how much we can contain in our system. I mean,
they can all be contained. The thing is that there is a kind of uniformization and a misrepresentation of some other languages that can have nuances that cannot be easily translated. You gave the example of the Malagasy not using the I, and this needs the structure of the Malagasy language needs to be captured, and for that to be captured by an AI system, you need a corpus of data of the Malagasy language. And often in those countries, like they use French because it's an ex-French colony, and I don't know if they use their own the Malagasy language on the internet. So, and which makes it even more complicated to have a corpus of dataset of these languages. And of course, there is a kind of uniformization. English is already, everyone almost speak English, and it's AI is kind of pushing further this kind of uniformization and everything and all the biases that comes with the language. So I don't know if this is what Eric was asking about, but in terms of AI, if you want to capture those nuances in each language, you need a certain size of
that's why
I think my point was like, I mean, AI will miss the concept behind the language more than even the language, because the language is not so bad. I mean, it can talk many languages quite well, surprisingly.
Could you repeat that?
I say, I mean, it's I was more like I would say worry about missing the concept behind the language and the language itself, because if you take the LLMs, they're quite good at speaking kind of any language. It was first very surprising, but I mean, it actually be able to play in Spanish, English, German. I mean, can think in many languages. Just that when it's lower represented, I think the deeper concept behind will have difficulty to percolate and be part of the weight.
There is the, if you remember when we used to, before LLMs, the translation of irony and stuff like this was really complicated to capture. But today LLM can do that, and so of course it can capture the concepts. Still, there will be a need to have a corpus of data set that is quite okay, I would say, a certain size, for those concepts to be captured.
But still, like, I'm going back to my original response, the first response. I agree. It's pretty good in German, Spanish, French, not only in English, but, you know, Italian, like Indo-European languages. But Korean, like I said, it's much better, but it's nothing like in English or in French or in German. So if it has more data, I think it will be a different thing. But the problem is, even to collect the data, I think, I don't know how easy.
Yeah, but I mean, there's been so much centuries where the Western has produced many data, stores the many data. So there's, you know, a huge bias in the quantity of data, and you will never catch up on that. It's, you know, it's history.
Plus the similarities between all these Indo-European languages.
Yeah.
They share the same root.
Same roots and
structure.
And maybe you will.
That's not, I mean, no, that need to be answered. It's just like I'm saying, like there must be some technical challenge here to try to compensate for this.
Right.
I think Ruth just left.
Yeah.
We should have tell. I mean, we have a.
Oh yeah, it's past
asking this question. I'm very sorry, Ruth, if you look at it later.
But Remy had another question.
Yeah, I think Remy, you can go ahead. Otherwise, I can read your question out loud. Alors.
So
here's this question. Yeah.
You said we are still living in the Cartesian paradigm of subjectivity. Where do we see this today? Like everywhere. Like really, we see ourselves as a singular subject that is autonomous, independent, and solitary. And this is the base of so many things that we do in everyday life. Like I said, like one vote for one person, like one vote for one subjective person. And also a lot of AI developers or people who don't believe in body. No, really. I mean, really, there are a lot of people who think that, you know, consciousness is just about like brain, like there's no body.
Yeah.
That kind of idea is nothing new. It's not something that they came up with, but it's the dualism that this famous Descartes came up with. That mind and body are separable and it is divided usually, and we exist in that way and we can think in that way. Well, that's the paradigm, the Cartesian paradigm. So it's really like we are still in that paradigm. That's what I'm saying. Because we just so easily, without anything, without doubt, we say, you know, my mind and my body. You know, that's the standard way. Oh, are you going to say something more or?
No, thank you. That was nice. So I also have this. I had this intuition, and I just wanted to hear from you what your thoughts are. I also have, like, in philosophy, there's still this huge bias, I think, for representationalism instead of Heideggerian Merleau-Ponty type of thinking about being in the world.
Yeah, but even Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, they're still also in this paradigm to some extent. I mean, not that they're strongly Cartesian, but we can't say that we completely overcame this transcendental philosophy framework. So not just Cartesian, but also Kantian. We are really dwelling in this field of transcendental philosophy, although by Husserl and Kant, they're two different things, but still like this framework by transcendental, meaning that, like I said, it's different for Kant and Husserl, but we can basically say that there's this field that we exist as either
Narrative.
yeah
In the,
either in being in time, being in the world, or a subject, or so this idea like that there's this fixed like a framework that's already there, and we exist within this realm or domain or framework. So even though we try to go beyond this idea of subjectivity, to some extent we're still within this idea or concept. Well, not that it's something that is so bad that we have to completely abandon and find something new, but I'm saying that we need to go further. And that's exactly how philosophy has developed and everything else as well. Like just one step further each time.
Yeah. Any other questions so far? I think we...
It's already almost 6:30, so...
Yeah, more than 2 hours, so I think we are good for now. So maybe just before we wrap up, maybe you can move to the next slide.
Sure.
I think it's the next one. Yes. So briefly, for those that are connected or those that will see the recording, this is the announcement of the next session on June 27th. 4 p.m. CET time, and this presentation titled Science and the Birth of Phenomenology will be presented by David Carr. Maybe you can say a few words about him.
Oh yeah, David is my friend, a very good friend of mine, a wonderful human being, but also a wonderful philosopher. Magnifique.
Magnifique, super.
Yes. He studied at Yale. He got his PhD there, and he worked there a little bit. And after he was in Canada, actually, thanks to Ricoeur, actually, Ricoeur found him a job afterwards. After he worked at Yale a little bit, and then he was in Canada, and then at Emory University worked. He worked there until he retired, and then he moved to New York, and he's now in New York. And he taught there at the New School.
Okay. And he will be with us here.
Yes, and he'll be with us here in Paris next month, and he'll be talking about science and the birth of phenomenology. It's a big theme, certainly in phenomenology, because one of the most significant writings of Husserl is the Crisis. And David Carr is actually the translator of Crisis into English, from German into English. So he knows what he's talking about. He's very good. And he's also a good teacher.
Okay.
So he explains well, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it would be really great to have him. And so, maybe just the next one. So join us to stay tuned and connected and not miss the announcement of the next one. And I think it will be really a good session. And we hope that you liked today's session and discussion.
Yeah.
Thanks, Hye-Young,
Sorry
again.
about me sniffing
No, I
a
mean,
lot
you don't have to be sorry.
in the middle.
I mean, it's almost not 2 hours and a half, so
Yeah.
it's not. So thank you, thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being
Yeah,
here.
thanks to the people that have attended. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
This is how we like it. I mean, it's a
Yes.
discussion, not just us talking. Sorry for Ruud, who has to leave a bit earlier.
Right.
You can join us on Discord is the best place, basically, if you want to pursue the discussion. And as Hye-Young mentioned earlier, this is part of a series, and subjectivity, presubjectivity, and intersubjectivity, even though next time is not going to be about subjectivity, but it's part of the series. So question can be asked on Discord or next session of the series. So feel free to join us. Who should I thank? I have to give a big thank you to Alex Guiraud for all the
Design,
artistic work and design. Great job. Thanks. A big thanks to Quentin Barbier, our colleague, technical work director, and so on. A big thanks to Ouri, bien sûr, part of our team, and to Hye-Young. And
Thank you, Adele.
And yes, yeah. Donc, merci beaucoup, and see you